every time I get on stage, I say, hey, I just would like to thank John Kelly for firing my ass and saving my marriage and my Wall Street career. So thank you very much, General Kelly. Okay, let's get going here.
Warning. The political trade features probabilities and perspectives about politicians, political parties, political outcomes, and political wagering. The political trade is rated NSFP, not safe for partisans.
The number one biggest game is when they gain number fame. It's like a race at the top because they want to be boss. They don't care who they step on as long as they get along. Politicians in my eyes.
Welcome to this bonus episode of The Political Trade, the podcast for people with a passion for politics, probability, and profits. I'm Jeff Joseph, editorial director of Luckbox magazine, hosting the podcast where conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, partisans and wingnuts all come together to make money betting on politics by trading in the prediction markets. But today we're going to do something special, something a little bit different. Our special guest today is Anthony Scaramucci, hedge fund manager, author, entrepreneur, philanthropist, political fundraiser, and commentator, but perhaps best known for his stint as communications director in the early days of the Trump administration. As always, I'm joined by Mike Reddy. Mike is an editor at Luckbox magazine, a novice prediction market trader, and the producer of The Political Trade. Mike, I'm looking forward to this conversation with Anthony.
Oh, I know you are. It's definitely been a long time coming. I think we first mentioned it on the episode 2 weeks ago. But if I'm remembering this correctly, this won't be your first conversation with Anthony.
No, not at all. That's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to it. First of all, as a new podcast, what better way to reach a larger audience than with someone as provocative, outspoken, and plain-spoken as Anthony. And on a more personal note, I think I mentioned in the previous podcast that I know Anthony professionally, and to know him professionally is to know him personally in a lot of ways. And I don't know if, and let's bring Anthony on. Anthony, are you out there?
Yeah, no, I'm obviously amusingly listening to the whole thing.
All right, well.
And, the weird thing about it, I guess I grew up in an Italian family, so when you're telling, people have an allergy to the truth these days. So when you're telling the truth, it's sort of provocative, I guess. I don't know. But, if you were sitting around in my mother's house eating the macaroni, getting hit in the head with a wooden spoon, you were just saying what was on your chest, but we got a real shit show going on right now. And
there's a lot of wooden spoons flying around.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to get a lot worse.
I think so. We'll talk about that. I was going to share with Mike, actually, and I don't think, perhaps you remember our first meeting, as you know, we met because of my background in the hedge fund industry. You're a hedge fund manager with Skybridge, which is how many billion in assets are you guys up to now?
Well, it's been shrinking the last couple of days, unfortunately. But we peaked at 12. Then I got hit hard by the whole Chinese situation where we were selling to them, and then CFIUS blocked it because my small little fund of funds was a national security risk. That's known as the Washington two-step. And so we went from 12 to 10.5, and now we're about 10.2, which is not bad. We're happy with that. We're having a decent year. We're down only about 5% right now. So I'm sort of happy about that, but I'd like to get us in position here to start buying some distressed assets. But we got a really sloppy market. It looks technically unbalanced. So we're going to just wait it out a little bit.
On a trailing 12-month basis, you're probably significantly outperforming the markets now.
Yeah, well, that's true. If you put a dollar in the markets last 2 years, you're in there. You got about 70 cents. If you put it with us, you got about 95. So we're happy about that. Obviously, we're losing money for people, so I'm not in love with that. But I like the fundamentals of the underlying assets. So last time this happened, we had mid-teens to low 20s returns coming out of a debacle like this. So it sucks. It's going to be a while to get through it, but when it comes to the other side, I think there's going to be very exciting buying opportunities here. But frankly, today, it being a somber day, I'm more worried about the health and safety of my loved ones and our fellow Americans. And listen, this is a global thing. I'm not in love with the president calling it a Chinese virus and all of that sort of thing. It's almost like, and not to get spiritual on you guys on a trading podcast, but, it's almost like a reminder from nature that we're all the same. We all can be equally affected by a disease and or a virus. It doesn't matter class, social order, gender preferences, sexual preferences, etc. So here we all are. It's a classic reminder of how connected we are.
Well, and it certainly is a global thing. Looking at the Johns Hopkins screen, we're up to 230,000 total confirmed cases today. That's a jump of about 20,000 from yesterday, and 9,300 deaths and 84,000 recovered. That's the bright spot on the screen, but the amount of confirmed cases seems to be growing pretty quickly. China, of course, in the first slot with 81,000, but we're looking at the Italy data, and it's kind of amazing to think they've had almost 3,000 fatalities already, which is within 100 of China. And on a per capita basis, Italy is just really getting hit pretty hard.
Well, if you believe the data, and so I don't want to say that the data is fake because I don't know, but I think, we have a lot of healthcare consultants that are staffed to help us on healthcare issues. There are many epidemiologists that think that these numbers are lowballed. The great travesty in the United States is that for whatever reason, the administration made a decision to suppress the testing. The more nefarious idea around that would be that the president was trying to reduce those numbers so that he could claim a victory relative to other nations. And he thought a number reduction would be better for the economy. But the great irony about what's going on right now is that he's frankly been outed, because you can call fake news when things are subjective or speculative. We're debating in our society now about facts. So it makes it very hard for the left and very hard for the right to debate each other, because we are litigating the facts. We don't even have the same facts anymore, because we're getting our facts delivered from various and disparate news organizations. So now here you have a scientific crisis. Math doesn't lie, as all of us know on this podcast. And he's sitting there trying to curve the truth to his distorted reality. And he wasted 2 months. And so now, 72 hours ago, he says, well, I always knew it was a pandemic. But I'm just telling you guys, a lot of this market crisis is related to the president's leadership, because every time he opened his mouth for those 3 weeks prior to the sea change, we were seeing trillions of dollars ripped from the market, because people were like, man, he's going to tell us a very big lie about where we all are. So he's calling New York a hotspot, but New York is actually not a hotspot. The governor of New York, who's doing a masterful job on this, Andrew Cuomo, is just testing more people.
Cuomo's communication has been extraordinary, don't you think?
I 100% think it has. It's been very calming and very reassuring, but at the same time, he's explaining to people what's going on. But just recognize, if we handed 20 million test kits out right now, those numbers you're seeing from Johns Hopkins, I think they would blow through the roof. And again, from what the science is saying, 80-ish% of the people are asymptomatic, but they would have the virus in their system, and they would be fighting that virus.
Well, this data can't be suppressed much longer, and I share your concern about the data coming out of China, because that's been questionable from day one, and there has been some material evidence that that data is being suppressed, and the confirmed cases have been suppressed in China. But ultimately, here in the United States, any effort to suppress confirmed cases, it's not going to last. We're going to know those numbers soon enough. And
Thank God for the free press.
That's right. And you shared some information with me yesterday based on some of the research your own research team over at Skybridge has come up with. Is that information you want to pass on?
Yeah, but there was a number of different categories. The what we think the virus, the scale and size of the virus, or the stimulus package that we're recommending. Which one do you want to go?
Well, let's talk both.
Well, I think you've got possibly 9 to 10 million people inside the United States that have the virus, and probably 300 million people globally that have one of the two versions of the virus. And again, 80+% of those people are likely to be asymptomatic. So it's the remainder of those people that are creating the transference. And so by sequestration or personal isolation, whatever we want to call this stuff, you can actually kill that virus. That virus won't be able to jump from one human being to the next. and then the human beings that have it will build up the antibodies, and then the virus will dissipate, and that will give us time to create a vaccine and give us time to analyze some of these drugs that are available. My team, looking at the drugs that the president was announcing, the Zithromax combined with the old malaria drug, they think there's very harsh side effects to that stuff on your heart and kidneys. So you only want to take that if it's in an emergency. But I love this guy because he makes it like it's a panacea, which of course it isn't. So we're dealing with some very harsh reality. This is as if you took 9/11 and the global financial crisis and you added a land-based invasion of our homeland. And so it's not soldiers, but it's something that is almost as deadly, if not more deadly than soldiers. It's an invisible set of molecules known as the coronavirus. So to me, this is tantamount to World War II. You've got a full-blown economic shutdown. In the financial crisis or at the 9/11 debacle, stores were open and people were trafficking in the stores and restaurants and their donut shops and nail salons. But you have flat out hit the pause button or stop button on businesses large and small throughout the United States. So it is a very different sort of crisis. This is a healthcare crisis. The Fed is trying to liquidate markets to make sure that it doesn't become a overblown financial crisis. But man, you're looking at Skybridge estimate. The Bank of America estimate for the second quarter is minus 12%. Our estimate is minus 16. And that's a combination of using artificial intelligence, credit card receipts, open table. Obviously, there's no reservations on open table. Can you imagine this? Nationally. And so if you just go through the multiplier effect and you demultiply the consumption, we are already in a consumer-based, consumption-based depression. And so now you have to say to yourself, where are we going from there? I really believe the government has to step in here. It's a force majeure situation. They're the only player in the marketplace that can replace the aggregate demand that we have lost, this full-blown evacuation of aggregate demand. So to me, we did the calculations. We looked at state by state adjusted gross income. We backed out the very, very wealthy. And we said, okay, there's approximately 300 million people that need to be cared for. 85% of the American population is making $85,000 or less. And so we're calling for $3,000 a person if you're an adult, $1,500 a person if you're a child. That will calm things down and create more public safety and create more of an ability to restart the consumption cycle. And then, in addition to that, having like an accordion-like structure that effectively lends gifts or grants to different organizations depending on their size and their needs. The restaurant industry is saying 70% of the restaurants will close permanently. If we don't step in and provide some kind of relief, you're going to be in a debacle sort of a situation burning out of this. And so this is almost like a national FEMA situation. It's like a hurricane has ripped through all 50 states and it had an impact around the globe. So the US, I'll just give you this one last stat, 20% deficit spending of GDP during the early 1940s while we were combating the war. It peaked in 42 at 26%. And at the end of the war in 45, it was 20%. So if you just do that math, the trillion that we're already spending pro forma plus another 3.2 trillion would actually get us to the promised land and would reposition America. And when I've told some of the legislators that I'm close to and a few people that I'm still close to inside the administration, if you want to put America on very strong economic footing and put us back to circa 1946, 47, right after the war, you've got to inject this sort of stimulus and recognize if the crisis ends early, then it's not it's an accordion. We can collapse the accordion and it's not a $3 billion stimulus. But if it has to go out 6 months, you've got everybody calm and everybody willing to do what we need them to do to stay safe and healthy.
And we're seeing, you're seeing on both sides of the aisle right now, lawmakers that agree that immediate economic stimulus is necessary. And you've seen ranges floated from 1,000 a month to up to 3,000 in checks. Like, what do you think the reality is of the timetable of that actually occurring? What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, here's what I would say is that they've got the phase one done. Obviously, the president signed it last night. I think they're going to get there. I think they're going to realize that what we're saying is true. I think when they originally sat down, their economic forecasting was minus 5%, and their relief program was based on a 6-week sequestration. But what if it's minus 16 and it's a 20-week sequestration or a 26-week sequestration, which is 6 months? And so to me, I would rather them go even bigger than they're suggesting. And so will they get there? Yes, I do. Once they start seeing the data that the private sector people like myself are looking at, I do think that they'll get there. Remember what Winston Churchill said about America, particularly our politicians: we always do the right thing after we've exhausted every other possibility, right? And so that's where we are with these politicians.
Yeah, it looks that way. Certainly the financial sector is waking up. Bank of America officially declared that the economy has fallen into a recession today, joining the rest of the world, and is taking a deep plunge. They said in their note to clients today that jobs will be lost, wealth will be destroyed, and confidence depressed. And of course, the other banks have stepped in as well and made similar statements. So a recession is clearly pending, and a depression is clearly likely. I think it's important at this point that there would be legislation that eliminates special interests. I've noticed that both parties have tried to throw things into pending bills right now to get a stimulus out there that speak to other interests and other political interests that don't directly address the crisis at hand. Do you think it's always going to be politics, even in the face of crises?
Yeah, well, I do think so. I mean, you saw the grab bag last time with the Obama $900+ billion stimulus. And I just point out to people, we know empirically as econometrically oriented people that the Obama stimulus didn't really have a multiplication impact that we thought it was. I could go into all those analytics for you, but it's 10, 11 years ago. It's not worth it. But it just proves if you're putting politicians in charge who are going to try to feed the beast of their special interest and people that give them money to help them stay in power, you're going to have some leakage in a program. This is why the Andrew Yang, clean, no intermediary, no nonsense. Here's the check, or we just wired it from the U.S. Treasury. This is a reverse income tax. This is effectively a revenue, grant, if you will. And if you, on a monthly basis, said, okay, we're going to give you $3,000 for the 6 months, so you're getting $500 from the U.S. government a month for each adult in the household, and slightly less than that, $375 if you're a kid. All of a sudden, you get this consumption bump, confidence boost. And people will recognize, okay, we can wait this out until we can get the economy restarted. And then, man, look out. You put that $3 trillion in place and we can tide these people over. I think you'll have a spring-loaded third and fourth quarter. And, people talk about the president and whether or not he can get reelected with this. In January, I said, this guy, no way he's getting reelected. The consensus was that he was going to get reelected, and the consensus is usually wrong on stuff like that. But now the consensus 60 days later has reversed. And so for me, when we talk about predicted, it's sort of even money, Biden and Trump. What I would say is that, he pulls off a stimulus like this, he could come out as a hero in this situation. Even though he's like a rambling maniac in these press conferences are horrifying. I mean, it's like a controlled verbal car crash. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think, for the first time,
it's like, you're looking at the thing and you're going, oh my God, when's the airbag going to come out of the press podium? and save us from this thing.
Well, you've acknowledged, well, it's a quote of yours that there could be no co-stars in his orbit, but I think for the first time he's woken up to put, to move over to the side and put Fauci in charge, because he's been a more calming influence in the same way that Cuomo has. Cuomo's press conferences have been somewhat masterful. I think it bodes really well for him politically down the road too. I think you look at how Governor Cuomo has acted in the last couple of weeks. I think it speaks really well for his political viability going forward on a national basis. But what do you think about the one thing that the president and the administration continues to come back to is the early steps they took at the onset of the pandemic with restricting travel to and from China? That does appear to have been the one smart move that they have made. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I want to call balls and strikes. I mean, I understand that there was a racially charged accusation by the Democrats on that and so forth. But in hindsight, that was a good move. I think people question the president's nefarious motives because there's always seems to be some kind of racial undertone to what he's doing. But I think that was a good move. I want to call balls and strikes on that, but and call it in favor of the president. But here's what I would say. I can send you guys this link. Maybe you can include it in the podcast. The recount link that starts on January 22nd, where he says we have no problem. He makes 17 more comments up until March 17th. Okay, so from January 22nd to March 17th, we have no problem. It's a hoax. We have one person, it's going to zero. We have 15 people, it's going to zero. It's going to fade away when the hot weather comes. It's a Democratic hoax to try to get me out of office again. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, 72 hours ago or 24 hours ago, whatever the number is, he's now saying, hey, wait a minute, it's a big deal. We're fighting a war. And last time I checked, I always knew this was going to be a pandemic. And so when I'm horrified by all of that, it's so abnormal that we're literally allowing ourselves to be gaslighted by the president of the United States. And we have a group of people at Fox News that are like mental gymnastics and mental figure skaters where, you guys remember Nadia Comaneci, we're all the same age. I'm waiting for one of these news anchors to get on the verbal balance bar and stick a 10 on the ridiculous lies and the curvature of reality. And so go to the Mediate site where you've got these Fox anchors on one day saying one thing, and obviously someone must have gotten to them. They say something completely opposite 2 or 3 days later. So we're living in a funhouse mirror media society now where it's very hard for people to get the information. And so they're very jaded by these people.
Well, as a transition away from the pandemic, which is certainly the right thing for us to speak about at the outset of this conversation, what you just said does reconcile with me, because I remember when you were appointed communications director, and knowing you as I do, and how plain spoken and what a good communicator you are, an extraordinary communicator actually. And, seeing whether it be on Wall Street Week or on the stage over at SALT or speaking on behalf of your hedge fund, I always thought that was the great opportunity that the administration had to get communication, take charge of messaging again. And the messaging has been dreadful from the administration at the onset of this crisis, and finally moving over and letting Fauci take center stage is obviously in his best interest going forward. And I think that's going to be done. But it was a sad thing to see your short stint at communications director, because he has always needed somebody to speak on his behalf, and without the narcissism and racially insensitive chosen words of his, and everything that we know about this president that's so flawed. You were in a position to correct that. It was an unfortunate outcome. And by the way, do you know that you were actually a predicted market? Are you aware of that? What were they predicting? That I was going to get decapitated by my wife? Or no. Actually, the outcome was an outlier.
Remember, fellas, if you're listening, Castration is permanent. Be nice to your wives.
How about it, right?
What was it? What was it?
No,
Yeah,
well,
what was it? What were they? What were they?
The predicted often has these different markets on. For example, one of the markets I'll talk to you about when we get into the trade section in the second half of this podcast is who is the next cabinet member that will leave the Trump administration. And don't answer that now, but when you were appointed as communications director, you became a predicted market, and it was what month will Anthony Scaramucci no longer be communications director, and it went out about 14, 15 months. And obviously those are called brackets, and the traders were all over those brackets, some at the front end, some at the back end. But you are considered to be one of the shortest lived long-term markets that Predicted ever sponsored with your early departure.
So I'm like sort of at this point in my life, I would have been humiliated by that if you told me that the day after I was fired. It's almost 3 years now, and after everything that has unfolded, I am super happy. I'm super grateful and appreciative. And I do public speaking now with John Kelly around the country. We also were in Abu Dhabi together, and John obviously was the person that fired me. And so we've got a pretty good rapport on the stage. We've become close personal friends. We're actually talking together this morning. And every time I get on stage, I say, hey, I just would like to thank John Kelly for firing my ass and saving my marriage and my Wall Street career. So thank you very much, General Kelly. Okay, let's get going here. Point being, you don't know where things are going to go until they go. I'm sorry if I let somebody down that made a bet on me in the predicted market. But man, let me tell you something. That turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
Oh, how about it? I bet. Well, I wanted to take this opportunity a little bit because I don't think people really know you that well. So I find you so interesting because I have defended you, and as you've been attacked by the media from both sides pretty viciously. When you were a surrogate and spokesman for the administration, of course, the media on the left was really out to get you. And then now, of course, the media on the right, as you are a pound the table anti-Trumpism spokesperson. Now the media on the right is out for you as well. And I remember having conversations with people who were just simply making binary decisions based on their own partisan viewpoints about who you might be. And it was so clear to me that people don't know your background. So I'll share a little bit, but I want you to say more. I know you come from a middle-class origin. You ended up going on to Tufts. You went on to Harvard Law School. In fact, you were in the same class as President Obama at Harvard Law School. You went on to Goldman Sachs. After that, you founded a hedge fund firm that now has about over $10 billion in assets. You've written several books. You are the founder of the SALT Conference, which is after Davos and TED, perhaps. Those three conferences really represent the most forward-thinking thought leadership conferences that are out there that I can think of. And, you're so accomplished in so many different ways, but people just saw you through one partisan lens or another based on their own partisan perspective. And what you said earlier about calling balls and strikes, that's what I know about you. You will acknowledge what someone is doing right. You will acknowledge what someone is doing wrong. But it leads us kind of into a question about the media. What does it always have to be this way? I mean, for example, you and I had dinner in Chicago about 2 or 3 years ago. It was a wintry night, as I remember. It was just you and I, and on your cell phone while we were speaking, you got a call from Sean Hannity. I don't think you're getting calls from Sean Hannity anymore. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's funny you say that. No, I talked to Sean last night. So, Sean and I are very, very close friends. And so we've decided that we're not going to let politics or politicians get in the way of our friendship. So we actually are business partners on a few investments that we've done privately. We grew up very close to each other on Long Island. We've known each other a very, very long time. And so, he's, thick as thieves with the president. I dislike the president's strategy. I don't dislike him personally. I just think he's been a disaster for the country. And my attitude with the president is, if you or I were hiring somebody to run a portfolio company for our private equity fund, and we had 3 years of data like this, we would be hitting the eject button as fast as possible. But we're in a tribal society. So what you're describing that's happening to me and our tribal society makes sense. We have news screeching in from the left and news screeching in from the right, and people are locked into their tribes, and so they have to do and say what they think their respective tribes want. And the president's been a masterful cult leader, masterful. He's got people so manipulated, and these people have never felt more important than when they attend his rallies. And for some reason, he has this bully from the high schools magic about him, where weaker people want to have him like them. And you remember that scene in the high school cafeteria with the bully, you know? And so look, it is what it is. We're here now. But I tell people, listen, if you go into the NFL and you're playing for the Patriots and Tom Brady, he's in the Bucks now, but last year he's throwing you a pass and you get meleeed by a middle linebacker from the Steelers and you're flattened, you can't complain about that. You put the jersey on, you put the helmet on, and you went into the NFL. I went into politics, and rightly or wrongly, I went into politics, stood at the White House podium. I may have only lasted one Mooch, which is an 11-day period of time. But let me just tell you guys something. There's been 33 Mooches since the last press conference. And as it relates to Stephanie, who's the press secretary now, I'm 1-0 on her. I've done one more press conference than her. And so the point being, you're up there on the podium, you are a target. And so breaking from the president, I'm a target on both sides. My oldest son is at Stanford Business School. He's 27. He said, Pop, you're killing me. I said, why is that, AJ? He said, well, the Republicans hate you because you broke from Trump, and the Democrats will never accept you because you were with Trump. You're killing my business network. And I laughed. I said, well, maybe I'm getting closer to the truth.
Maybe.
And maybe more Americans are where I am, which is independently streaked and just are exhausted with all of this nonsense and rancor and would just like some good government.
Well,
not left or right policies, but right or wrong.
And you and I have had that conversation before in terms about not left or right, but right or wrong. So that's a good segue into a question. As we've been doing this podcast, we've been sending our guests, because they are making forecasts on political prediction markets where they place their money. And we've been asking our guests in the past to complete a political questionnaire. You might have seen it. It's the world's smallest political quiz. It takes all of a minute. It's very searchable. Anybody can go online and find it right now. It'll ask you about 10 questions. The result of that will show where you line up in this grid between conservative, liberal, libertarian, authoritarian. It's a well-acknowledged quiz that literally millions of people have taken. And I took it, and I fall right in the middle as a centrist. In fact, so does Mike, my producer, that's on the air with us as well. I had the rest of our editorial team at Luckbox Magazine take it, and typically with editorial teams anywhere, they skewed considerably more to the left than Mike and I, who sat in the center. I know where you sit politically, or at least I believe I do, so I didn't ask you to take that quiz, but maybe you can just speak to that, our own audience. It's a combination of where you stand on social issues, where you stand on fiscal issues. How do you describe yourself politically now? Do you still call yourself a Republican? We know you're not a Trump Republican, but
well, you see, I don't think Trump is a Republican. I think that he's turned that party into the Trumpist party. It's a totally different party than the party of Reagan or George Bush or Dwight Eisenhower. So it's the Trumpist party, formerly known as the Republicans. And so I still see myself as a Republican in the tradition of somebody like a Mitt Romney or a Jeb Bush. And I'm a moderately streaked Republican. And so, I like using the following words. I say I'm socially inclusive. Because if I say I'm socially liberal, Jeff, the other side has spent billions of dollars destroying that word to 50% of the people. The minute the word liberal comes out of somebody's mouth, all the people on the side of conservatives have disdain. And then if you say you're fiscally conservative, well, then the liberals hate that word, right? So I say I'm socially inclusive and fiscally responsible. And that's where I live. I don't care who marries who. I've been working on the gay rights initiative. So many Democrats were not even aware of that. But talk about strange bedfellows. I was working with Rob Reiner and Chad Griffin from the Human Rights Campaign on nationalizing the gay rights situation. And we were the first people, one of the first hedge funds to give money to the senators in New York to get the Marriage Equality Act passed in the state of New York, which was the precursor for the National Act. So for me, again, I'm more in the camp that I don't want to sit in any one of these tribes. And again, I'm going to go back to high school because we have a high school bully for the president. If you're in the cafeteria, I was the guy who didn't want to be at one table. I was moving through the tables, and I think this cliquey tribal stuff is really hurting the country. And, again, not to get spiritual or so forth, but maybe the universe is telling us something with this virus, that it can impact all of us. And maybe we can find more commonality. And after all, the first name of the country is United. And so why are we allowing this orange tribal leader, this orange-faced tribal leader, to split the country and disunite the country? And for what purpose and what gain?
Well, we want to come back with you in a moment after a break, but I want to ask you one last question because we want to get to your actual trading ideas as well as to where you might see opportunity in some of these political prediction markets. But since we are a traders podcast in many ways, as you know, it's been many years, a proposed financial transaction tax that's been floated out there. What's your position on that tax?
Well, I'm negative on that tax because Wall Street's greedy. There's a lot of bad elements of Wall Street. I think there's policies that we can put in place that can actually improve Wall Street and widen the arteries of Wall Street. What do I mean by that? I see Wall Street and the financial services industry as the arterial structure of the American capitalist body. And so the bloodstream is Wall Street and the capital flow. So if you're developing an idea in fracking, capital will flow to that idea to get it started and to create that industry, or social media, or you pick an industry. And so when you're doing a wealth tax or a transfer tax like that, it has a constricting effect on capital. And so if I was sitting with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez or Elizabeth Warren, and they're talking about a wealth tax, what I would say to them, well, we're competing with other countries. Remember, tax is a price for services. I know you want to use these taxes to innovate social policy, but it is a price for services. And what I would say to them is you're going to disrupt capital formation. As an example, if you're telling me you're going to tax my wealth 2% every year, I'm going to be moving my wealth offshore. And I would point out to these people that my wealth is not in a swimming pool in $100 bills in my backyard, but I just walk back there and take the $100 bills and roll them around in a wheelbarrow. My wealth is tied up in my business, the capital in my business, the lease deposit, the equipment in my business, the office space that I have around the world, and obviously the events, the budgets for the SALT conference. And it's tied up in the 65 people that are working for me, and we pay 100% of their health care. So for all of those reasons, I would tell these people, you're making a very big mistake. You're going to cause a level of constriction that you don't want. You would be better served with a value-added tax. You'd be better served with a education credit tax, some kind of education recovery bond that you could sell to endowments and charities to help rebuild the education system. The point being is that it sounds good on paper. And when you're talking to a voter that is coming home from work tired and they just want to watch a few sitcoms or they want to watch reality television and they hear the soundbite, well, you don't have the money, they have the money, let's take it from them. It sounds good, but it has a real meaningful negative consequence on a society. And by the way, I say that as a person that grew up with nothing. I now have something. I'm not speaking from my self-interest. I have no problem paying my taxes, and I never bellyache about it.
Understood. Well, it reminds me also of how you kind of showed up on the national stage in many ways. You were known by Wall Street for quite a long time as a result of the prominence of Skybridge Capital. But you really showed up as a political commentator the first time you called out President Obama at that town hall press conference or at the
Yes.
town hall.
Yeah,
That in
yeah,
fact, I have a
if you
clip
can
of
believe
it.
it or not, that's 10 years. That's 10 years ago now. Yeah,
I'm going to play that. Hold on.
The question I have, sir, and this is something I really, a lot of my friends are thinking about. Listen, I represent the Wall Street community. We have felt like a piñata. Maybe you don't feel like you're whacking us with a stick, but we certainly feel like we've been whacked with a stick. So I certainly think that Main Street and Wall Street are connected. And if we're going to heal the society and make the economy better, how are we going to work towards that, healing Wall Street and Main Street?
Does that bring back some memories for you?
Well, yeah, it brings back some memories. He's an amazing politician, so he smacked me around. It wasn't. I didn't feel like a piñata in that case. I felt like a Coke can in front of a steamroller, so that was fine. But let me tell your viewers one thing: as an Italian American, you should probably not use the word "whack" on public television in front of the American president. So, I mean, I learned a lot on that day as well. But I mean, him and I know each other a long time. He came up to me afterwards. He gave me his hand in that sort of diagonal handshake, and he leaned into me and he said, "Mooch, I hope I wasn't too hard on you. It's just politics." I looked at him. I said, "No, I got no problem with it." I said, "The great irony is I was trying to lay up a question about how we can make Wall Street and Main Street more simpatico, and you seized on it like it was nobody's business." And then I got a call from Steve Schwartzman at Blackstone, because somehow he got into it. If you remember the president's answer, Steve said taking away carried interest would be like marching on Poland or something like that. And so the president brought that up. And so, I was in everybody's crosshairs that day. That was a precursor for what happened to me in the Trump administration.
Of what was to come ahead. Well, great. Well, we're going to take a short break, Anthony, and we're going to be back for what our listeners always regard as their favorite part of the show, and that is when our guests tell them where they believe there are mispriced opportunities in the market and predict it. So your unique political perspective, I think, is going to offer some insight to some of these markets. We're going to be right back in a moment. But first,
want a little more luck in your life? Get Luckbox, the control freak's guide to life, money, and probability, named the best new magazine of 2019. Luckbox is a must-read for side hustlers, gamblers, entrepreneurs, and active investors. Each issue features best bets from prediction market experts, as well as timely sports wagering, stocks, options, futures, and cryptocurrency trading ideas. You can buy Luckbox on newsstands, but with this special offer, listeners of The Political Trade can receive a 10-issue digital subscription absolutely free. Just visit getluckbox.com to receive the award-winning magazine right in your inbox. Don't rely on luck. Get Luckbox for free today. Learn more at getluckbox.com.
All right, we're back with Anthony Scaramucci, who refers to himself as the Mooch, and has his friends call him that as well. Anthony, that's unique also. You're very comfortable being called the Mooch. How far back does that go?
Well, I mean, it's hard to believe this. I mean, it goes back to 1972, and this was an era of complete and total lack of political correctness. And I had a very staunch, hardcore World War II veteran as my phys ed coach. And he did not like people with long last names. And so God forbid if you were Polish or Italian or, you had a weird last name, he didn't like it. And so my last name was 4 syllables. And, and I think it was actually 5 syllables coming through Ellis Island, but they anglicized it, guys, by making it Scaramucci as opposed to Scaramuccia. That was a little bit of anglicization, but anyway, he looked at me and he picked the 1 syllable of the 4 that he liked the most, which was Mooch. So my last name is Scaramucci. So my gym coach said, "Okay, you're from now on known as the Mooch." I looked at him. I was like 8 years old. I said, "Okay, I don't really give a shit. Call me whatever you want. Just give me the dodgeball." And so that stuck. And then when I got to the White House and people call me the Mooch, the journalists, particularly the ones that hate Trump, they loved it. I mean, they thought it was the greatest thing because, Mooch means you're a moocher.
Sure.
And then they were playing the Queen song for me, Scaramouche, Can You Do the Fandango? So I got a lot of mileage out of that song when I was a kid. And, the truth of the matter is I actually don't give a shit what people call me. I have been called so much worse than the word, I mean, you have no idea how many things I've been called. But I'll make you guys laugh or cry. I got invited to a CPAC dinner, and I went. And I was debating somebody that's a hardcore Trumpster. And I got there, and people were loaded up on some booze, and they started booing me when I walked in. And when I got to the microphone, I looked at everybody. I said, "Hey, you know what? I'm getting so old, I can't even hear the B sound anymore. The only thing I can hear right now is Mooch. If you want to keep doing that, it's raising my self-esteem. Okay, so you can keep doing that. I'll feel great when I leave, or you can let me talk and I can give you my point of view." So, I mean, you got to let stuff roll off you if you're in politics.
That's great. Jeff, I don't think you ever finished telling that story about how you met him.
Well, Anthony, maybe you recall this, but the first time that we met professionally, it was back at the time when I was doing work in the hedge fund space, hedge fund media. We had put together Hedge World and then sold that to Thomson Reuters, and then we're working on other hedge fund platforms. I was at Hedge Fund Research doing investigative due diligence on the hedge fund industry, and we also had another hedge fund news and information platform. And we met initially as a result of this, and this is many years back, but I recall which is still your office in Midtown, New York. When I showed up there, you were just coming from or on your way to a media hit. And I don't recall what the transition was, but all I remembered was in the first 5 minutes of you and I together in your office, you completely disrobed in front of me and changed into because you have a coat rack in your office because you're always doing media hits.
I mean, let's face it, I have pretty amazing middle-aged man boobs, though, don't you think?
Well, I was moderately impressed.
I'm trying to get you or your producer to throw up in your mouth.
Well, it was before the Me Too era, and now when I think back on this episode, fortunately I'm not the litigious type, but that was our first 5 minutes, as I recall.
So I'm a pretty uninhibited guy,
right? So someone who is completely transparent. That's how I think of you.
Did I expose my leather dental floss bikini thong as well, or no? Because I have one of those.
It's one of the reasons I keep on calling. So we're gonna move on.
That was a little bit of fake news. Okay, I'm a boxers, not brief guy. Just so you know, a little bit of fake news.
There were boxers. That's right. You are a boxer guy. I do recall that to be true. So we're moving into the prediction market part of this show, and you've looked at the predicted markets. Are you familiar with prediction markets in general? Have you been following them much?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
It's
I've
interesting.
been on the website recently.
And we've watched Predicted over the last year. Really has become as prominent as 538 or Real Clear Politics on all the networks when they're speaking to how the market is assessing a political outcome. A lot of the history goes back to 2006. That's when Justin Wolfers over at the University of Michigan, he's an economics professor and professor of public policy over there, wrote a somewhat seminal paper that proved up the notion that prediction markets, because of the crowdsourced forecasting capabilities, are highly accurate, and that the binary options pricing, everything's priced in pennies from 0 to 100, are very well correlated with the probability of that outcome occurring. So when we talk about any prediction market, we say that Joe Biden's trading at 64 cents. That really is the market saying there's a 64% probability of that occurring. So it's been interesting to watch as more and more traders come to predicted.org. Now they have over 200,000 registered traders on that site. And of course, trading volume is picking up materially going into the general election coming up. And then also in the course of this podcast, as we've spoken to many traders who are making six figures trading in these markets, not as part-time, but sometimes even as full-time gigs. So it's been an interesting market to watch, and we've become big fans of it, particularly because of my own background in hedge fund due diligence and analysis, and because of yours as well. Having someone like yourself who has an investment background, but who is so versed in politics and the stories of the day, I think this is kind of a sweet spot for you. So we were really excited about the idea of getting your takes on these particular markets, because political bias is one thing that is really the reason that these markets are inefficient. Since Mike and I started trading on these markets, we're between doubling and tripling our money in a very, very short period of time. We've heard similar experiences from many of the other traders, and it has to be because of the inefficiencies of people who are partisans or wingnuts that are just so devoted to their outcome that they don't think in terms of probabilities and what's likely to occur. So we know where you are politically and but you call balls and strikes, and that's what we're hoping you'll do in this segment. We'd really like to hear what you think the best trades are. So I'm going to shoot some trades by you. Let's maybe think of this as somewhat of a lightning round in essence. And there's many markets on prediction. We'll talk about what the pricing is, but let's start with Clemency. One of our guests on last week, who's a great story, he turned $400 into $400,000 trading on the prediction markets. He made a trade recommendation that on the Clemency market for Roger Stone. And the question specifically is, will Trump grant clemency to Roger Stone in his first term? The yes is at 57%, which means if you held it and he granted clemency, it would pay out $1. The no's, of course, are at 43 cents. What's your thought on that market? And while you're speaking to that, you can also speak to the related markets of Manafort and Flynn are also clemency markets that exist right now on predicted.org. So starting with Stone, he's 57 cents. How do you think that's priced?
Well, I like that pricing because I do think there's a better than 50-50 chance that he pardons him. Roger's got a lot on President Trump. And if you read House of Trump, House of Putin, Craig Unger, who's a phenomenal award-winning investigative journalist, will tell you that there's a direct linkage between Russia, WikiLeaks, Roger Stone into the Trump campaign. And if you tie that into Trump's public remarks at around the time that these nefarious things were happening, him and Stone are connected to each other. And, the Mueller report pointed that out as well. So there's too much stuff that Roger Stone has on the president. And so he's indicated by tweet that he would potentially do it. I think the only thing that's stopping him right now is the political backlash that he could face. But if he got up in the polls or things started to look better, he would definitely pardon him. If you wanted to ask me what the bid-ask spread should be, should the president win a second term, I think it's in the 80s.
Where would you price? Well, right now, Flynn is at 65 cents and Manafort's at 30 cents. What do you think the probability of clemency pardons are there?
Yeah, I think Flynn is a harder one, to be honest. I know they have it priced up there, but I think he's under 50. And the reason I think he's under 50 is that Flynn doesn't have anything on the president. Always look at trades. If you're following predicted and these trades are related to President Trump, you have to think like you have no morals, and you have to think about one thing, that you only care about yourself. And so he could care less if those guys rot in jail or not. It's more about what's in it for him. The pardons that he's done recently have all been related to the potentiality of his reelection. And so I don't see how Flynn or Manafort help him with reelection. And he's not the kind of guy. If you remember, Casper Weinberger got in trouble with Iran-Contra, and I can't remember if George Herbert Walker Bush pardoned him or commuted his sentence. But Bush did that out of loyalty. Trump does not do things out of loyalty.
So you give Stone a higher probability than Flynn or Manafort of a pardon?
Yes.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, and I'm not sure why I selected this one to ask you about, because you and I have never spoken on Israel or Netanyahu, but I'm curious about your opinion. And the question was, will Netanyahu be prime minister of Israel as of 12/31? Will he make it through this year? The current price is about 50-50. It's 56 cents for a yes.
But I think General Gans just got the nod, didn't he, last night? So I think it's almost like I've got a little bit of inside information. I think that he was told that he could form the 61st government of Israel. So I don't know if that's true or not. We have to check it on Google. But without knowing that information, it's always hard to bet against Bibi Netanyahu because he is a stone cold survivor. When I was blown from the White House, I did a trip to Israel with a group of Republicans. And somebody said to me, well, you're on the outs now. You got really beat up badly, but you're not Bibi Netanyahu. I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, in 2003, I think it's the Likud party, got down to 6 seats in the Knesset. And he went on to become the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. So it's very hard to bet against him. But if I didn't know the information about Gantz, I would have put that under the 50-cent mark.
So you would think there's a probability that he'll make it through his term.
Yeah, the probability, but I think Danny's going to oust him here shortly.
Mm-hmm. There is a penny stock opportunity just because of the low pricing, and that is, will Trump and Kim of North Korea meet again in 2020? It's a 8-cent yes.
Yeah, I would have it at 0. I mean, I get the whole optionality and anything can happen. It's Donald Trump, so it can't be priced at 0. But I just want you to think about the political ramifications of that. And also, you want to talk about a guy that's a ridiculous germaphobe. I don't think he's going to Asia anytime soon.
So that's a 92% no right now, which gives about an 8% return. And
I think it's well priced, but
I think we have a trade. I think that's a good trade. All right, moving over to this is an interesting market, and maybe you have some insight here. It's an obscure market, but it's will Pence be the 2020 GOP vice president nominee? It's trading at 78 cents as a yes, 22 cents as a no.
I got that at 90%.
At 90%. So you think there's about?
Can I tell you why I have it at 90%?
Please.
Because I think that if you look at those markets, there's no availability for somebody else at this time, in my opinion. I don't think, given what Pence is doing here with the coronavirus and given the whole way this thing is set up, I would be stunned that he'd be able to move away from Pence. If you had asked me that question 6 months ago, I would have said to you, there's rumblings about that, and I would have had it priced higher than I do today.
So at 78 cents.
So meaning I would have had the no price,
sure,
in the 30s or the 40s, but at 78 cents, I think that's on the low end. That's probably, pretty good value there. That's going to trade up.
All right. It looks like a good trade with a lot of upside at 78 cents. Next up, and this is a market we've been speaking a lot of, particularly as the Democratic field for the presidential candidate's been winding down and focus on Biden as a front runner now, and it's the Democratic VP market. It's, as you know, there's a lot of names out there. There's a conventional wisdom that suggests that it would be a woman of color in the VP slot. We'll walk through who the names are, but let's pull that up, in fact. So if you were to think right now, what does that selection look like? What are the considerations for Biden for the VP pick?
So you want me to rank my picks?
Please.
Okay, so I got it at Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, Kamala Harris, and then Stacey Abrams. Those are his 4 picks. And I got them ranked in that order. And if Elizabeth Warren accepts it, she will be his nominee. She will be his vice president.
Warren that's interesting. So obviously Biden has a lot to owe to Clyburn, right, for his late endorsement that led to so many votes coming out in the South, and he explicitly suggested that a African American woman should be the VP pick. You think he might?
Right. Well, if he can't get Michelle Obama to do it, I don't think he's going to go in that direction, because I think he's going to say to himself, and again, this is just my political calculation, the biggest risk of the Democrats is the progressive wing of the party defecting from Joe Biden. And he's not going to pick Bernie Sanders. And so the person he can pick closest to gravitating that wing to him is Elizabeth Warren. And if you look at what Secretary Clinton did last time, she made a move towards a moderate with Senator Kaine, and she did not pick up the transference. I think 71% of the Hillary Clinton voters in 2008 crossed over and voted for Barack Obama, but under 50% of the Bernie Sanders voters crossed over and voted for Hillary Clinton, and that's why she lost. And so I think Joe Biden is well aware of that. They're also well aware that this thing is likely to come down to Wisconsin. And so for those reasons, they have the debates up in there, and they have the Democratic National Convention, should it take place, up in Milwaukee. And so I think, and that's why I would go Klobuchar after Warren.
So let's go through your order.
She's in the neighboring state. He needs to win Wisconsin.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear on your order. You have Warren in the first slot, Klobuchar second, Tulsi Gabbard third, and Kamala Harris in fourth?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
so Warren is clearly a value play right now at 9 cents. That's a really attractive upside with Elizabeth Warren at 9 cents. Klobuchar is at 27 cents. Kamala Harris is at 30 cents.
Yeah, I would go with Warren at 9 cents. That's got to come. By the way, let me just tell you something. The media, again, because you guys trade in and out of these things, you're not holding it to close. The media is going to start speculating that as we get closer. So that 9 cents is going up.
Oh, that's a hot trade. By the way, just as a stepping aside for a second, one of the interesting things about these markets, they exist under a no action letter, an exemption letter from the CFTC that allows for this trading to occur because Predicted is sponsored through a New Zealand university, and the data is used for academic purposes on assessing the collective capabilities of crowdsourced forecasting and predictive modeling. And under the exemption letter, they limited the amount you can wager on any underlying contract, not market, but contract, to $850. So in the VP market, which has 15 names, you could essentially have $850 on 3 or 4 of those names. You can buy yeses, you can buy nos. And as an aside conversation, as you look at these markets, and I know, because of the hedge fund due diligence you do as a hedge fund manager, particularly as a fund-to-fund manager, working with large firms that do arbitrage, that the data mining opportunities here, if this was opened up to a larger market, my fear is that all the opportunities would be arbitraged away by the influx of institutional professional money, and that there's a great wisdom in capping this right here.
Yeah, exactly. You and I are old enough to know that we've seen lots of spreads tighten through the forces of technology and volume and more aware, smart people entering the market.
Yeah, so this works because of these caps. If there was more money at play here, because there's a lot of people that are advocating that these markets be allowed to trade as futures markets without caps. But my fear is that instantly these opportunity sets would be arbitraged away, by professional money.
Well said. Yeah, I totally get it.
So back to your pecking order, we have we have a great value play on Warren at 9 cents, and followed by Klobuchar, Gabbard, and Harris. All right, we're going to move on. That's Democratic VP. There's a list of markets, and I'm just curious about your gut, because this is what we all know the 2020 election is going to come down to, is who wins the electoral vote in 4 or 5 key states. On Predicted, they have which party will win in 2020 in a number of markets. So let me list the markets. First, Pennsylvania.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, makes sense. Michigan.
Okay, so this is where I think Joe Biden. Michael Moore would say Donald Trump. So that's going to be a really tough one from a pricing point of view.
Michigan currently, the Democratic win. Democrats are 66 cents and Republicans are 37 cents.
Yeah, I would be buying Republican on that, knowing that price differential, because it's going to be too tight. It's not going to be 66-33 as we move into the November timeframe.
That's right. That would be very likely to tighten up closer to 50-50. So there is an upside to trade there. The next market would be Wisconsin.
So I think that's the whole ball game there. You have a blue governor in that state now. Last time there was a red governor, and I think Joe Biden wins that. And so I don't know where's the Democrats' price there.
Democrats are 60 cents. It's 60-40 right now in favor of the Democrats.
Okay, so I think that's fairly priced. I was just going to say if the Democrats are under 60, I'm a buyer. But I do think he wins that state, and so that's probably a low vol, grinded out sort of a stock.
Yeah, and that likely is the whole ball of wax. And then another.
That's the ball game right there. Yeah, that gets him to the 270. That has Trump winning a lot of the other states. Joe takes Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and he wins the presidency.
Well, and that leaves Florida, obviously another key market. It's currently 51 cent Republican and 49 cent Democratic. kind of a toss-up in the prediction markets?
I don't think that could be more fairly priced between those two. So unless something happens seismically to one of them, like Joe forgets that he's Joe Biden, or I don't know, Trump does something even more ridiculous than he's done. It's just hard to believe the exponential ridiculousness. But I think that's fairly priced. That's going to be a toss-up.
Okay, I've got three more quick trades for you. One of the markets of interest as a result of our last guest on last week is the GOP Senate primary in Alabama, where Tommy Tuberville is running against Jeff Sessions. Tuberville's at 81 cents, and of course, he was recently endorsed by the president. Sessions is at 25 cents. Our guest that was on 2 weeks ago called that trade out when it was at 10 cents, and he said it's a pound the table buy. And Mike bought it at 10 cents. It's trading at 25 cents right now. I put in a price order to buy it at 9 cents and missed it. Not worth noting, but it's currently 25 cents for Sessions, 81 cents for Tuberville. You can see some of the mispricing there because it adds up over 100 cents. And what's your thought on that market?
I would be buying Jeff because he's done it before. I think he's got deep relationships in that state, and they genuinely like him in the state. The president's sore at him. But, I think a lot of the Republicans think the whole Roy Moore thing was mishandled. And so, yes, the president's super popular in that state. I'm not understating that. But I think Jeff Sessions at 25 cents, I'm a buyer.
All right, terrific. And two more to go. And this one I think is an easy one now at this point. Trump, first-term recession. A yes is 85 cents as of today.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's going to trade to – you should ring the bell on that because I got that trading to 99 in like 3 weeks. I mean, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Because I know the data. You're going to get 2 quarters of negative growth coming. Boom, boom, second and third quarter, and that's a recession.
And finally, the whole ball of wax. Presidential winner, Biden is at 47 cents. Trump is at 46 cents. And I want to add to Anthony, about 3 weeks ago, we had a guest on, and Trump was at 57 cents here. And the guest, who was that, Mike, that said that we should be selling Trump because of the coronavirus?
Oh, that was
that Jason Pipkin?
Yeah.
Yep. And he identified that as a sell when Trump was at 57. He said it's going to go to the mid-40s. He was dead on, to 10 cents right. And now you have Biden in the lead in the prediction markets for the first time. And I know you have strong feelings about this outcome. So how do you play it?
Yeah, so I'm going to shock you here. I think that that's fairly priced, and I would think Trump under 50. He is the incumbent, and he has the power of the presidency, and he could light this thing up with the $3 trillion that I'm talking about. And you have to understand something about Trump. We're 238 days out from the election. That's like 500 years in Trump world. Just think about where we were on January 15th. In the inevitability of Trump and where we are now with a global pandemic going on. So in Trump world, this is 500 years away, and he is the incumbent. And so I would say Trump should be at 50 right now.
Got it.
So
noted.
I wouldn't move. No bell going off on that.
Well, noted. And
again,
the best thing
I'm gonna work very hard to get him, removed from office, of course. But I'm me, I don't talk politics with my wallet. I talk it just with my heart.
Well, and you have a pretty good track record as a predictor too. I remember back in 2016 in August, Michael Milken asked a roomful of hedge fund managers who was going to win the general election. Everybody raised their hands on Clinton, and you alone raised your hands saying that Trump was going to win, and that certainly was not what your peer group thought. So you earned some prowess as a predictor back then, which is one of the reasons I'm going to make sure we have you back on the show before the general elections.
Well, I appreciate it, and I will tell you, in February, when we were all still traveling, I was with Michael Milken in Abu Dhabi, and the consensus of the 400 people in the room that Trump was going to win a landslide election. And I would bet that those people. And I stood up and raised my hand and said, you're going to lose. And then I texted Milk and I said, I'm saying the opposite. I said in 16, I was the outlier. And And I bet you there's a lot of those people, those predicted markets have moved since that day. But this has been a lot of fun, guys. I've really, really enjoyed it.
It's great to have you on. And I want to add
like a
something.
big antidote to cabin fever, by the way, because I'm locked in my study. I got the stank eye when I went out to get a bottle of water from the refrigerator because, my wife is juggling the kids out there and ready to blow her brains out. So I did get the stank eye.
I bet you've been on for a while.
Yeah. If I didn't have to call one of my clients right now, I would stay on with you guys until maybe next week.
All right, but I do have to mention that if our listeners want to get, as they should, you've got this great podcast with Deirdre, your wife, called The Mooch and the Missus, and you're on listen, I've really enjoyed listening to it. First of all, because you're so outspoken on issues and really cut to the meat of things, but you're like a podcast magazine. The diversity of your guests and your topics has been really entertaining. I particularly liked a couple weeks ago where you had the woman speaking on the China trade policy, and that was a conversation I really hadn't heard on some of the missteps that Trump has made with respect to confronting China on trade, and I thought you guys did a great job on that. So that's The Mooch and the Missus. That's available wherever people listen to podcasts. Anthony, it's great having you on.
I really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you. I'll let you go. And for the rest of our listeners, remember you can stay in contact with us simply by visiting luckboxmagazine.com. Click on the podcast tab. Next week's podcast will return to our regular format. We'll be featuring prediction market super trader I Savage, who's well noted among prediction market traders for the I Savage rule, which is sell at 90. So we'll talk more about that. Anthony, it's been great to have him on joining us, and look forward to having him back again. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This is Jeff Joseph.
And I'm Mike Reddy.
And wash your hands, don't touch your face, stay healthy, and join us next week on The Political Trade.